Oh, mercy. 5 years ago and now. Well, we was just ordinary housewives. Uh, we taught ourselves to drive. We didn't go any place that we didn't take the kids, which was just to the grocery store and maybe to the laundromat. We wasn't involved in anything, not even PTA. We didn't feel like we could uh, donate anything. We didn't think there was anything we could do.
My house changed around the Supreme Court decision. I remember my father saying, well, that's the supreme law of the land. It was like some thunder had spoken, Oh, when Eisenhower sent the 101st Airborne Division into Little Rock, Arkansas, my father said, he's a fighting man. He's not afraid, or he wouldn't have sent them soldiers in there. He means business. It was like this thunderous time. We were living in a time when we really could do something.
I knew there were people who couldn't read and write. I've been knowing that all my life, but I never felt there was anything anybody could do about it.
Like everything bad I've done, it's been the first time around thing, and you feel like a pioneer. You got nothing to go by. You're just making it as you go, and I'm gonna just do what I can, and hope that somebody else picks up where I leave off.
A lot of us avoid getting into fighting with the system simply based on the fact that we say that we can't win. I say we can win with the system. And the majority of the people, nameless people, faceless people that folk will never know, are the one that makes those changes most of the time.
We are marching, we're marching up to Zion, that beautiful city of God. Well, we are marching, we're marching up to Zion, in that beautiful city of God. Well, we are marching up to Zion.
Dream of people all together singing, each singing a way to self, to realms on realms within, all singing their way on out of self, singing through to unity. There comes a moment, a turning, when people stop thinking about what has happened to them and start thinking about what they are going to make happen.
That's one of the gourds I grew. You just take the gourds and cut a hole in it, hang it up, and you've got it. Then it's up to the birds whether they want to use it or not. You've done all you can do. They make the decision from then on. That's what they want to do about it. And they come back in the winter.
In 1932, in the middle of the Great Depression, Miles Horton and a few of his fellow Southerners started the Highlander Folk School in the mountains of East Tennessee. It was a school for adults, for people out of work and out of money, but with the will to make life better. Highlander was a place for people to meet, to share with each other their life experiences, and to learn what they might accomplish together. But the story is not in this place. It's in the people going back to their communities with new information, a sense of unity with others, and the determination to bring change to the world about them.
You got to move, you got to move, you got to move, child, you got to move. But when that law, get ready, you got to move.
I grew up in Charleston, South Carolina, and segregation was a way of life. We didn't question it, we accepted that. But then I went away to New York to find employment, and when I returned in 1947, I became aware, fully aware then, of how segregated Charleston really was. The only way we felt we could bring about changes was through the vote. And blacks weren't allowed to vote in the primaries in South Carolina and in Charleston. And the primaries really was the regular election because we didn't have but a one-party state. Once the decision was handed down that everybody could vote in the primaries, there was another block that was placed in our way. We had to read a section of the South Carolina State Constitution in order to be able to vote. Some people could read and could pass the test, but there were many, many that couldn't. I knew that something had to be done, but I didn't know I would be involved in getting anything done because nothing had been done before that I knew of. You see, and this is the problem because these things aren't passed down to know what had really been done. I didn't know what my daddy had done until so late in life, you see, to make changes in working conditions. So naturally, when I came back and I realized that this is where I had to be for a while, then I became involved in everything and anything that would bring about some changes. I came to Highland in 1955 because my cousin, Septima Clark, had been there the year before, and she told me about blacks and whites being at Highlander, living together and working together at the Highlander workshops. And in 1950, there weren't many places you could go where blacks and whites could meet. And so I was curious to go and see for myself what she was talking about.
We will overcome. We will overcome. We will overcome someday.
It was the only place in the South where blacks and whites could really meet, you know, and come so that we could know that we had allies out there. The beautiful part about Highlander is that you could be washing dishes with somebody who had, like Dr. King used to say, had a PhD or no D's. Whatever was on your mind, you could say it. The whole workshop was a demonstration of how you get people to talking about what they think is the most important thing they need to have done in their community. Esau Jenkins from Johns Island, who came up with us to the workshop, was there. And he said, what I'd like to have back there is a school. Teach my people how to read and write so they could register and vote, because that's our basic problem, you know. And that turned the whole workshop around. People from the North want to know why we couldn't register to vote. So then we started talking about Charleston, Johns Island. Esau ran for the school board. He really ran to try to win because they needed representation on the school board. But he also ran in order to show the people that if they were registered to vote, that they could win. There were 3 seats vacant on the school board. He came in 4th. The groundwork was set then to getting citizenship classes going. Many of the people on the island worked long hours in the field, so the classes could only be held during those months which they call the laying-by season, which is December, January, and February. Miles Horton of Highlander said to Esau, you find the place, and I'll look for funding for the classes. They asked me to teach the class. I said, no, I'll help anybody who is going to teach the class, but I'm not going to teach it. Well, when they said either you do it or we won't have a class, then of course I could turn it down. First thing I said to them was that now, they say I'm a teacher, I'm your teacher, but I'm not a teacher. And we are going to learn together. You're going to teach me some things, and I'm going to teach you some things. And I think that one statement sort of put everybody at ease. Anna Vashteen, I will never forget Anna Vashteen. She couldn't read or write. And it was the greatest reward when I had all the names up on the board one night, in jungle fashion, you know. And I asked them, could they pick their names out? Miss Vashteen said, I see my name. And she went down the list and she took the ruler for me and she said, that's Anna. That's my first name. And then she went over on the other side, up and down, until she found Vashteen. She said, that's my name, V-A-S-T-I-N-E, Vashteen. And goose pimples just came out all over me because that woman couldn't read or write when she came in and she was 65 years old. Any community we went in and operated citizenship classes, if there was no particular community organization in that area, we would organize that first class into an organization so that they would have some ongoing influence in the community and an ongoing learning process. They'd say, well, we don't have a leader in our community. And we said, well, what about you being a leader? Well, no, I'm not a leader, they would say. But we say, you know the problem. If you know the problem, you see the problem, you know what needs to be done to solve that problem, then you're the one that has to take the ball and run with it. It's like light coming into darkness. Once they learn how to read and write, they always voted after that. We started with the pilot project at the Citizenship School, and the results were such that everybody wanted it. And it grew, and it grew, and it grew, and it grew. And it was really the basis of the entire civil rights movement. The entire civil rights movement built on that base because people became aware of the power that was within them that they could use to get things done.
As the momentum of the civil rights movement was growing, so was a concerted effort to stop it on the part of all the southern states. Highlander, because it was a meeting place for people in the movement, became the focus of attack by Southern white resistance to change. The state attorney of Arkansas started a southwide move to get Highlander closed, which began with an illegal raid and culminated in a trial against the school's morals and ethics. May Justice, a neighbor of Highlander, remembers the trial.
They said, showed me a picture of this black woman dancing with a white man. Miss Justice.
Miss Justice, can you see this central picture right here where this colored man and woman are in the act of dancing together?
Yes, sir, that's a square dance, I suppose.
Could you approve of this kind of sociability?
I see nothing immoral about it. It's a square dance. I can look on television anytime and see worse things than that.
Now, that's a colored man and a white woman, isn't it?
Yes, sir.
Well, don't you know, Miss Justice, that the Tennessee law prohibits marriage of colored people and white people?
Yes, but I don't regard that as a part of a marriage ceremony.
Just tell him what you know, what you've seen there.
Well, I couldn't say that I'd seen anything, only just what I'd already answered.
Well, you've never seen men and women in cabins together?
No, I've not seen that.
Compromising position?
No, I've not seen that.
Have you ever seen Mr. Horton around there with any of them?
Well, I've seen Miles go to the woods with him time after time.
Time after time.
Time after time.
What else have you seen him do to him while he was there?
Well, really nothing else to him.
Well, would he kiss him?
No, so he would have his arms around him.
Do you know or think you know the reputation in the community of this Highlander folk school?
Well, they like the colored folks. That's the main issue.
I don't care what they teach. Be it racial integration, or be it communism, or be it whatever they want to. It's a integrated whorehouse! I don't care if it's integrated or not. If it's a whorehouse, I'm at it.
It's Justice, you're a woman of a very fine reputation in the community.
Thank you.
And you know that your association with the school out there is raising great suspicion.
Sir, I believe that a person must live by his Christian principles regardless of the opinion of human beings. And as long as I can lie down to sleep at night knowing that I have done right, the world may think what it will of me.
They finally got us out of the building and closed us down in Montego in the fall of '61. And Highlander moved over to Knoxville, and we set up over there. Kept right on with what we were doing.
The trial rather demands on the part of governors from several southern states that something be done to put Highlander out of business, because they said it was a cancer of communism spreading over the South. What they had reference to, of course, was the idea that we were integrated and we were advocating social equality. They called Highlander communists in the early days when we were working with the unemployed. Later on, when we were working with the trade unions, where blacks and whites were being organized in the same unions. During the civil rights movement, the charge was constantly made that civil rights activities were communistic, and Highlander was labeled a communist training school. And in the future, if we get involved in any situation where the people learn that their own personal interests are linked with the self-interest of other people, they get together to act as a group, will be called communists. It's an effort on the part of people in power to discredit actions that challenge the status quo, to brand efforts on the part of people to make democracy work for them as communists. And people just have to understand that will happen.
If you go back to the 30s, when Miles Horton started it, and they were working with people with the unions, you would have thought that it was a union education school for union organizing. And if you come to Highlander during the late 50s and the 60s, it was a civil rights movement school, training school. And if you came a little after that, it was about strip mining or nuclear or waste dumps or whatever these people in the South were being pressed upon. And that makes Highlander special for me, the ability to move through time. Over my head, I see freedom in the air. Over my head.
The object is not to destroy our white brothers, but the object is to destroy the system that enslaves both our white brothers and ourselves. So that when we go today to the lunch counters,
We go today to the park. We're going about our business quietly, dignified manner, because we realize that our actions not only affect ourselves and our parents, but they affect Albany, the Negro community, affect the Negro community throughout this country, and the best thinking people in this country, and the whole cause of justice.
There must be a God somewhere.
In my early days, I was never in the front. I was not a leader. Now, a leader couldn't get very far without me because I was a singer. And so I could pull people together, or I could create an atmosphere. So I was right behind, but I was not the radicals who broke through new ground. And they generally scared me. I thought they were sort of crazy. But then I'd be right behind them, you know, being in jail with them, whatever. I went on the first demonstration in Albany, Georgia. On November the 11th, 1961, the Interstate Commerce Commission ruled that anything that crosses a state line had to use the integrated facilities. And so we decided Thanksgiving we would test the facilities. And the second demonstration, I had the choice of the second demonstration or going to test, because it was also final exams. I took my final exams, and they arrested Annette, who was my best friend. She didn't take her final exam. She went to, I mean, if it had been the last march, I would have died.
All right, let's stop it right here. Come up here where you hear us. Don't come up here where you hear us. You're welcome to picket, but this grouping up here is going to stop. They'll be allowed 2 here in this block, and the others will move out. We'll allow 2 picketers in this block at your front of the city hall where you're picketed. You can leave 2 here, or you can go. The others that don't go and continue, you'll be arrested. Now let's have 2 in this area right here where you picketed.
Oh, preacher, oh, Kelly, oh, preacher, himself. Oh, preacher, oh, Kelly, oh, preacher, himself. He got children crying for mercy. He got children praying in jail. He got children, you know they're suffering. He got children praying in jail.
Leading up to the demonstrations, there had been very strong signals that I was getting out of hand in terms of the usual recipe of a black person going to college, getting a degree, that sort of thing. The student government had been suspended the spring before. I was in the student government, so I'd been suspended. And I was going to meetings and workshops about the movement. In mass meetings in jail, they would say, Bernice, lead a song. And I got to the place where I knew I had a contribution to make with singing and the willingness to go anywhere that the movement said go. I think about Diane Bevel talking about when she worked with the Nashville sit-ins, the Freedom Ride. It was the safest time she had been in her life. She never felt safer. And it was because of who she was surrounded by. And it's like when you get to a place where you can come together with people who share the same experiences, and you can just sort of work on what your life should be about. It does not matter what your opposition will try to do to you, because you're already home and you're safe. And Hollander is like that space.
How can a man be free? One man ain't free, all men free. Me myself now, I mean, I had all the opportunities I wanted.
We've been going so far. I really think what's special to me about Hollander is like the risk where they will trust people. If you can give people some space to talk about who they are, then you have to respect what they come up with and have to try to figure out ways to help them. And they will work out what steps they can take in their lives to change.
We shall go to jail. We shall go to jail. We shall go to jail someday.
The Civil Rights Movement was about this mix of the community, with students always pulling the front line and the vanguard position, pacing the change. They do it best when there are few older people who can understand, and they have a better chance of surviving the pace that they set if they have some grandparents in there. And we did.
Get up.
Now, so I can look at some of the things we did, and I said, what in the world came over us, you know? But death had nothing to do with what we were doing. If somebody shot us, we would be dead. And when people died, we cried. And we went to funerals. And we went and did the next thing the next day. Because it was really beyond life and death. It was really like, sometimes you know what you're supposed to be doing. And when you know what you're supposed to be doing, it's somebody else's job to kill you. The thing that the movement was about, which was like daring to give people the belief that they could step out on what they understood and do something about it, is really what I still run on. It's not a calm, everyday way of life in the society we live in. We are embattled. We are under attack. And I think the only way you can do is give in or fight. To say, no, I do exist, and this thing I feel is real. It's not a dream.
Law can adjust to right. You don't have to adjust to laws that are evil. If it's against the law, as it was to have blacks and whites together at Highland, you have to violate the law. If it's against the law to march without a permit in Birmingham or in Selma, then you have to march. In other words, you have to do what you need to do what's right.
Law and order people, which is backed up by police, and the police is backed up by the army, force. Those people have all power until you declare your independence from that power. And they don't have any.
If you're going to have a system of law, you've got to violate the unjust laws and take your stand and do it publicly.
No man can get out of here.
real scary road when I was a kid. We used to walk 5, 6 miles from here to see some girls that live on this road, and it really, it was always okay walking, coming, but going back at 1 o'clock in the morning. These trees and everything moves at night. The noise from all the animals and insects can be very frightening. And of course, I believe in ghosts also, so that also adds to my fright. This is Johns Island, South Carolina, where Bernice Robinson taught the first citizenship education classes. I've seen a lot of changes here, and I've been a part of a lot of the changes. And when I first started seeing the racism, really was recognizing the policeman that we had on the island and the way that he treated black men. And right in front of this church where we are right now, when anytime that they heard this policeman car, men heard his car coming, everybody ran for the bushes. They just went and hid while the policeman drove by, simply because everybody was afraid of him, and he's killed so many blacks already. And that's the, you asked, we were talking earlier about religion, and at about 11, I went to my grandmother that I was really upset in terms of how men ran away, black men ran away from Chief Henderson, and how I felt that if I ever grew up or when I grew up, I would kill him, and these were my exact words to my grandmother. And my grandmother said, son, what you do is that you got to leave people like him in the hands of the Lord. That is something that was so far out for me at that particular stage in life. And that's when I was at the age where I knew that old people had no sense. I decided to join the Army in 1951. Took my basic training in Hawaii, and then we went straight to Korea. That was the year that the Army was integrated. All the time being in Korea and in Japan, I felt basically as an American. And then getting into California, Camp Stoneman, where they separated us simply because blacks and whites could not ride in the same train or in the same coach across this country, I began to feel a little shaky. But getting on the train, my white buddies and I went to each other's car, and we drank beer and played cards and those kind of things. Getting into Fort Jackson and going into Columbia into the Greyhound bus station to get a ticket home, I was asked to leave the Greyhound bus station by a policeman because it said that I knew that blacks did not have any right in the bus station. And I had to ask him, well, where do I belong? And he showed me a hole that was cut in the back of the bus station where I would purchase my ticket. The white guy that I was fighting with really was sort of embarrassed, but they all just lowered their heads when that happened to me. And that's why, I guess, during the 60s, I took position that all whites that were over 30 or around 30 were racist, simply because when I was mistreated, nobody stood up for me. That bitterness continued. And when I went to Harlanda with Esau Jenkins in 1959, I was totally discouraged in terms of what could be done on a broad scale to make changes. Meeting people at Harlanda that had been working for 25 and 30 years attempting to make changes really gave me the incentive that things will not change overnight, that you have to continue to work at it very, very hard. Harlanda had the agenda of poor people. It was able to bring all people together, people that did not have the education, people that did not have the motivation, were able to go there and have certain things about their own selves articulated. There are people that have gone to Harlanda with their image down here, and they actually were up there because they didn't have a proper image of themselves. I think Rosa Parks was one of the better examples of that. I think that the image of herself was low until she left there and decided that, I'm really up here, and I'm going to do something about this situation. I have the power. I can do it. After the civil rights movement, I got to a point where black people have gotten the right to go to Francis Marion Hotel in the city of Charleston, but we couldn't afford to go there simply because we didn't have the money. So the idea about organizing union, the ideas from Highlander about political involvement led us into the Hospital Workers Organization. We recognized for a long time the plight of the hospital workers, and the Low Country newsletter we were doing, we were publishing articles about the hospital workers and the injustices that was going on at the hospital. They were not paying minimum wage. There were no differential between a nurse's aide and a licensed practical nurse or registered nurse, and people got fired at will if the supervisors didn't like them. So when 3 of the nurses got fired, one of the nurses came to me and said, you know, 3 of my friends got fired. Can you help us? So he said, now next Tuesday night, we want each one of you to bring one of your friends from the hospital that you know that you could trust. And the next week they brought 4 more. And we did that from 4 until we got to about 300. So when we got through with about a year or so of that, I mean, people were really, really proud. And we wanted the president of the Medical University Hospital to sit down with the workers and listen to their problems. And he refused to do that. The hospital workers recognized in March of 1969 that they had to unionize. 1199 out of New York and SCLC was called in. After that, the hospital administration arbitrarily fired 12 of the workers, and that in turn forced a strike.
I do not believe this is a civil rights issue whatsoever.
Why not?
I just don't believe it's a civil rights issue. They are working for wages at jobs which have no relation to race, creed, sex, or anything else.
When you're working around people who discriminate against you, you just really feel like, you know, fighting all the time because, you know, hey girl, and they had these nicknames they call you like Dooflaughty and Monkey Grunt and all this carrying on, you know, and I think all of us need to respect.
When we first really started picketing the hospital, somehow they started off with an injunction that you couldn't picket. That's when so many of us got arrested. And that's when I realized that we had to get the whole black community involved if we was going to win the strike.
We was women and we didn't have no weapons or nothing. I felt like they wouldn't hardly hit us with those big clubs and things. And we didn't went out to fight them, not with no fist fight. We went out to fight them, you know, with the law on our side, you know, to try to win through the law.
Doing all of the organizing and everything, I had a full-time job, and matter of fact, I was fortunate enough that my employer put a private telephone by my sewing machine so I could make my calls and people could communicate with me during the day while I was at the mattress factory. But I worked 8 hours in the mattress factory 5.5 days a week while we were doing all these other things. I went to pool rooms and bars and nightclubs and other places and met with people. With beauticians and barbers and black restaurants stuff, giving strikers food free or doing their hair. There was just so many things that were really a part of that. All of the organizing was done from within. It's like the gospel song, Lucy, that maybe I cannot sing like angels or maybe I cannot preach like Paul, but I can tell this story or I could do this, you know, that like nobody else can. And that is the kind of motivation that we did with the hospital workers. We had guys that just was able to tell stories, make people laugh when we were in jail. There were people that did sing. There were people that did stand up and look ugly and scared people. But we were able to make sure that they understood where they had a role to play, and they felt good about it. And as that strike progressed, you're talking about the city of Charleston being closed down for 100 days. I mean, all of the hotels in the city was empty. It began to bring the business leadership together in Charleston to recognize that they were vulnerable to poor people, especially poor black people.
We are returning in a new relationship of mutual respect and dignity between the workers, the county council, the hospital administration, and the entire community.
Ms. Simmons, what do you think this strike has accomplished?
Well, we gain recognition as human beings, for one. We gain that recognition as human beings.
When we first got started, when we got to about maybe 80 or 90 people, we had some whites to come in. And again, the whites really had problems because the blacks were suspicious of the whites being there. And there were black spies that was a part of the group that went back and reported to the head of the hospital that these whites were there. So they suffered from both sides of it. But it was really an experience for me because, again, I was able to learn that there were whites that were suffering the same way that blacks was as it relates to economics. Now, not having access to all of the restroom, not getting into the lunchroom, they didn't have those problems. But actually, they weren't making any money. And that's where the problem lies, because anytime a person making enough money, you can buy or look out for your own self. So I began to realize more and more, although it was subconsciously within me, that we live in a class system in this country. And there was a devised rule that keeps us separated. Although we're both poor, it keeps us separated over some trivial things that we don't realize.
I come from the mountain, Kentucky's my home, where the wild deer and the black bears so lately did roam. By the cool rushing waterfall, wildflowers dream. Through every green valley, there runs a clear stream. Now there's scenes of destruction on every hand, and there's only black water runs down through the land. Sad scenes of destruction on every hand. Black water runs down through the land.
Me and 4 of the children was almost killed that day. The water got deep around the house, and I just panicked and took them in the mountains. And the men that rescued us from that side of the mountain, we just had crossed the bridge, and the bridge washed out. So I guess the mercies of the Lord, we'd been dead. And what we found out about Cranks Creek was, after this big hard rain in April, it filled in these bottoms and the creeks. And with less rainfall, we was getting a lot more damage from the strip mining. And I think it wound up we had 7 floods here, like 3 years, 7 floods. It washes all the trees that's loose down, and the rocks and debris, and it just fills up everything solid. The water ain't got nowhere to go. And you don't hardly have to look twice, you know, to see where it come from.
Between 1950 and 1977, Cranks Creek in Harlan County, Kentucky, was one of the most heavily strip-mined areas in the Appalachian region. In strip mining, earth-moving machinery cuts into the side of a mountain to reach a seam of coal that may be as much as 200 feet below the surface. The trees, the rocks, and the earth that get displaced in the process gradually move down the mountainside, threatening the valleys and hollows below where people live. There were some state regulations on strip mining, but for years these were not enforced. By the mid-1960s, protests by individuals grew into collective actions. This public pressure resulted in a 1977 federal strip mining law, which made stronger provisions for land reclamation. But it's up to people to see that laws are enforced.
Jenny's hill got stripped away. Jenny's gone away. Strip mine operators had their say.
I see all this damage. All of a sudden I had a big yearning. I wanted to do something. I went around at that point and took down everything people had lost. It was all the way from bulldozers down to the kids' toys on the porch. So I convinced something like 16 families that we had a right to sue. They had damaged us and they owed us something. The first meeting that we ever had with the legal aid attorneys, I got up and I said, we want more than getting back paid for what we lost. We want to get that land reclaimed. You know, we got to live with that the rest of our life. Right here in Harlan County, most people, they never heard of reclamation work. I hadn't either till a month before that, but it rung bells with me and I was going to work for it. So it was a long ways to convince people that we could do it. I'm not out to get nobody or shut nobody's minds down or anything like that. I just want to see them do it better. Do it in a way we can live with it. You know, like people out of Virginia strip this side of the mountain. And orphan land can't even reclaim it because it's up in a lawsuit somewhere, you know. So they ought to be held responsible for what they do.
Through faith in my Savior and His wonderful, I can almost see.
I guess that would have been 78 when I started coming here to the Highlander Center. At that time, I didn't have no lifetime commitment to what I was doing. I think, you know, like with me, you work up to your full capacity. You got to have something to build you up before you can go any further. So workshops is a way to do that.
Starfire has another roadblock on a road that they claim.
I met a lot of good people as working with problems similar to what I was trying to do, and sometimes I'll sit around for 5 or 6 hours just listening to other people talk. I like that. You can learn a lot.
They've got a contract with a tannery to take care of their waste.
I don't know if it means that much to everybody, but you know, it has me.
We're not glad you've all got a problem, but it, you know, to know that everybody has got it and that we're not the only people in the world. Sometimes we feel like, you know, we are the only people in the world and that we're fighting the world.
Like her in 77, they moved in there and the whole mountain was just pushed off into the hollers and things, and anytime that you do that, you can expect for your property to go down. All that silt and stuff come off into the hollers and things, and from that, you could talk with them, nobody wanted to bear the blame after it's destroyed.
The government passed a law, they set up a reclamation fund, and y'all were the only community I know in the mountains that's won some of that.
That was $1 million to get dredging done with, and that was like 3 years of hard work. You got to convince the state, then the federal. So, right now, the only thing that's bothering me so bad is they're saying we're not going to get more of this kind of work done until the states gets primacy, which that could be never see. Now, that bothers me.
So you can't get any more of that federal money until the state takes over control of the law?
This is what the states would like for us to believe. Of course, I don't think that probably they could hold down on something like this for long. My education was just like a big black spot in my life. I couldn't go beyond that, I thought. I thought probably if you tried to do things like I've done, you'd need a, you know, like a college degree. But if you ain't got it, you have to go on without it. So I found out You don't have to be educated, you know, to do what you have to do. That little center of Ernie is very precious to me. We do some things a Highlander don't do, but it's for his educational purposes. I have used the Highlander to kindly model learn by. People dreads us saying something from the center because there is a group of us, a lot more than they would if it was said that Becky Simpson was doing something. All of us can't be wrong, so it's a source of power when you want to involve a lot of people in what you're doing. Well, I've learned you can't quit at one time. You know, like some of the easements I've tried to get to have land worked on, I've had to go back about 10 times. So I've learned you don't just quit when you're denied once. You go on to a different source and keep trying. You gotta keep trying.
I think a lot of times people who struggle and have only limited success feel that they aren't making a contribution. But the truth of the matter is that social movements and all basic changes are the outgrowth of a lot of people doing a lot of things, and they are laying the groundwork. That's one thing. And the other thing is that the quality of what takes place is being determined partially by all these efforts that are being carried on today. And so people should understand that they're making a contribution that won't be realized until a lot of people come together and start putting these building blocks into a structure.
Way up in a mountain, girlfriends, listen and beware. The waste flowing from the landfill has no peace for people there. They're afraid for the children and the poison in the land, and they're fearful for the future, but together took a stand. And I'm
From 1972 to 1979, hazardous chemical wastes were trucked through the East Tennessee community of Bumpus Cove and dumped in a landfill at the end of the road. The company in charge of the dumping claimed it was bringing in ordinary wastes.
It was supposed to be household garbage. That's what they told us. And that was okay because we didn't know nothing, but we'd seen garbage dumps around before where they bury papers and boxes and stuff, and we didn't think it was wrong. They give people jobs. The first thing they done was come into the community and give people jobs, and God knows they needed it. And they give my husband a job, and they give Mary Lee's sister a job as a secretary, and we was really glad for it to come in.
Well, I night watched a while and just worked around the landfill and stuff till a truck driving job come open, and I started driving a dump master for them.
And what did you haul?
I mostly hauled garbage, but I hauled some chemicals. Supposedly chemical, it was 55-gallon barrels.
Richard's brother, Hobart Story, we kept saying there was bad things in the dump. They're hauling stuff up there that they shouldn't haul, but none of us would listen to what Hobart was saying. And even if I had known what was happening, I didn't think there was anything I could do.
I thought, well, the state's on top of it, the health department, and they'll check it out, and if there's anything, you know, that's that bad, they'll let us know, or they'll stop it. They're pretty well on top of the situation. Well, but Hobart knew from reading, apparently, what was happening. But he'd say, I'd get sick, you know, when the stuff come by, and he'd go out and talk to them and say, what is it? I want to know what it is, because the stuff's about to smother me to death when you pass my house with it.
The companies would say, well, what do you mean? We don't know what you're talking about. So he sensed that something pretty crooked was going on right from the beginning. So he started documenting with his 8mm camera. He was trying to keep a record of what the trucks were dumping, noting the company name, you know, on the trucks. Find out where they was coming from, talking around and asking questions, just doing everything he knew. He went from house to house and he tried to tell people, but people just didn't believe him. They thought he was crazy, crackpot, troublemaker.
About 1:30 one morning, he followed a truck in here. It was marked radioactive, and watched it go on the landfill and dump it. And we suspect that them 4 spots over there is where the grass won't grow, is where they dump that stuff. The guy that opened this landfill up worked for the state health department at the time. And he went around to all the counties, condemned all their landfills and closed them down. Then he quit the state and come up here and opened this landfill up.
The scoundrel. He just went around, and any place that they had something that they couldn't get rid of anywhere else, he'd take contracts to get rid of it.
He came from Arapahoe Chemical, Tennessee Eastman,
Westinghouse, General Electric, Balsacol from down Chattanooga way.
All the industries in Upper East Tennessee.
A lot of trucks, 30, 40 truckloads a day sometimes. For 7 years, went to and fro this landfill. There sure was a lot of it. When a lot of people started getting sick, and after we had a couple of deaths that wasn't related to something like people was used to, they seen how it was right.
One time I actually had to lay my head in on the ice in the refrigerator to keep from passing out while I was cooking until I could go lay down. And Pam, one of my daughters, she started taking passing out spells, and she was just about 4 years old, and I would have to work with her to get her till she could breathe. And Angie, my other daughter, she was having real severe headaches, and it scared me to death.
Finally, one day, there was a flood, and barrels washed out from the landfill down into the creek, on into the river. That day, we decided that something had to be done. So all the men got together. They just said, we're going to stop the trucks in the morning at 5 o'clock. And at 6 o'clock in the morning, there was 200 people standing out in the road to stop the trucks. And it started from that point right there.
The way I was raised, just to tend to my business and let everybody else tend to his own business. But the more I thought about it, the more I seen that it was going to interfere with my business in the future.
I didn't know that from that step there was no going back. I was just trying to help a friend. I was trying to help myself.
We thought it would be a 1 day, maybe 3 days at the most thing, you know, and then it would all be over. We'd stop the trucks, and that'd be it. But it's never over. We just go from day to day.
We have changed so much. I didn't like the way I was. Ignorant.
A housewife.
A housewife. We wasn't involved in anything because we didn't feel like we knowed enough to be involved in anything.
Felt like your education was inadequate up to stand up or face anybody else with your problems.
Mary Lee was already working on the SALT grant, and she gave me an application to fill out. I wanted to work in education in some way, but I knew that I needed training because I got married at 14 and I don't have that much education. And when the woman come to interview us, there was nothing I could say about me. I told Marty, I said, I'm nobody. I ain't got anything to write down. I was supposed to fill out a
autobiography.
Yeah, and there wasn't nothing to say, you know. And when the lady come to interview us, she didn't think we would ever be anything.
Wait a minute, let me butt in. I was planning to say I wrote 3 pages about her.
Yeah, but she wrote it, see, I couldn't.
She couldn't think of anything to say. That's how
I felt.
Yeah, she didn't feel like she was anybody, you know. And I wrote 3 pages about her. To me, that was good.
But
how much did you write about yourself?
Page 9.
The first workshop, oh Lord, I was so scared when all these other people were sitting around and they had, you know, even like high school education, some of them had more, and they was already involved, and I was scared to death. I thought, oh Lord, they don't hear anything I've got to say. But gradually I started talking, and I found out they was interested in what I had to say, and I had accomplished some things that they hadn't thought about, and we started sharing with each other things that we had learned, and each workshop got better.
We had gone to the Highlander Center before, but we had just been there for seminars and things. Then we got Juliet to help us, and we put together a list of chemicals that helped us tremendously. You wouldn't believe. We went to the state health department. We went through all the Bumpus Cove files, laid them all out on a table, and went through the whole bit. And there was a lot that they did know about, that they had told us over and over that they didn't know about. And when we put this together, Tom Teasler, he's the solid waste management, he's the head of that, I think. And when he saw the little booklet or what order we had it in, and that you could tell what it was and what the health effects was and the amount that was put in the landfill, he said, where did you get this? How did you do this? Who did this for you? You know, he was amazed that we could get that from his files. And actually, I'm amazed that we could get it from their files.
Some of my neighbors depend on the state to tell them when it's a danger, the state's going to come by and tell us, but they're not. The state health department is not. It's got to be people just falling like dead lice before they'll ever do anything, then they'll call it serious. I'd like to do something or see something done before it gets to that point, because I know, you know, it will get to that point.
A long time ago, me and my mom and dad used to come down here and fish all the time. We'd catch fish and eat them for supper. We can't do that no more.
So why are you fishing?
Just so I can catch it and throw it back. Like the sport, like to fill and pull, mostly. People that dumped them in here lived off from here, and they didn't have to live with the poison in here, and they just didn't care about nobody else. Is my feeling about it. I think about the same way he thought about it. They didn't have to live in here. They live a long ways away from here, and they don't have to they don't have to drink the water from out of here. They don't have to eat any food that comes out of the mountains from around here. Mad, makes me mad.
Was born and raised here. From the top of that mountain to way back in this section, you can just mention, you know, certain rocks or trees, and we know what you're talking about, just the same as people in the city are describing
a street.
Yeah, or a pool hall. We know it that well. We've seen it all. Since I was a little bitty boy, and I'd come in the mountains with Daddy, and he was born and raised here also, so, you know. I've had people say, well, you know, if you're afraid of it, why don't you just move out? It's not something you can get out of easy. You can just throw down and say, oh, heck with it, you know, I'd rather be somewhere else. It goes deeper than that.
To whom it may concern, I am Gail Story, and I would like to reply to my neighbor's accusations that first of all, I am not communist, and I have never been approached by anyone that claimed to be communist. And Highlander is just a name of a place that has a library and people like me who can go there to learn things that we should already know about the schools and the laws of our country. Things that we as people of the United States have a right to get, such as information that is of public record. As for me, I am proud to be American, and I love God and the United States, and I am proud to be American, and I would never do anything to slander either one.
I'm the same person I was 10 years ago. I mean, I'm more active.
A better person.
But I'm a better person, right? Because I try to do something now. 10 years ago, I didn't do anything. Yeah, that's not easy. That's hard. This communist bit hurt us a lot. It really did.
Why do you think you were called communist for fighting against the landfill?
Well, at first I didn't know. I had never been attacked like this by anyone before, and I honest to God didn't know. That's why it scared me so bad. And then later on, we realized that it was because that we had organized, because we was an active group. And what other way to separate us up if they could get us arguing between each other or suspicious of each other. And in a community like this, to where people goes to church and they do love God in the United States, what else would you call them than to call them communists? And how can you prove that you're not? And the only way that we knowed how to work against this was just keep working. Just keep being strong, keep doing what we was doing, and that people that knowed us all of our lives would see that we hadn't changed, that we was doing what was right. And I'm still innocent enough to believe that truth will win.
Mr. Robert Story to be followed by Mr. Raymond Williams.
They go ahead and they decide to have the closure of the landfill. And really nothing that we said or nothing we done had took any part in it. They didn't listen to nothing that we had to say. I brought up the question about the clay. They made fun of me. All right, now it's come up, they can't cover the landfill with our clay because it hadn't been tested, and they tested after I asked the question, and it don't work. The clay ain't going to hold the chemicals back. And at whose expense is it better to leave it in this mountain? Is it better for the company? Is it better for the health department? Or is it better for us? Because we're being left with a poison.
Hobart's last trip to the landfill was just a couple of weeks before he died. Me and Richard was with him when he collapsed. Hobart's only 57 years old, and I'm convinced that the landfill is what killed Hobart.
Now, as much as Hobart knew and realized about these things, his brother said to me, do you think that something's going to happen up on that landfill and come all the way down this far and hurt you all the way down the road here 3 miles away? Now, he just don't understand. He don't realize what's happening. Then I asked him, well, what about the future? Have you ever thought about that? He said, well, you know, I'm 55 years old and I'm not going to live, you know, another 30 years. And I said, well, what about your grandkids? He said, well, I don't have any of them live here. And I said, what about mine? Don't you have any feeling for them? And that sort of stumped him, you know. But his thoughts never did go farther than just himself. And one other old guy that just died here a couple of weeks ago, I heard him say, hell, it ain't never going to hurt me. And I reckon he thinks the world was just going to stop when he died, or he wasn't concerned about it any farther than that. But it's time that people does give thought to people in the next 10, 20, 50 years, 100 years, even 200 if it lasts that long.
Oh, freedom. Oh,
song is a black song about black oppression. But everybody who is alive have to find that space and that part of yourself for which you can offer your life. A lot of times if you put your life on the line, they will not take it. You will not get killed for fighting for what you believe. Sometimes you will. But you cannot wait for the guarantee of life before you will fight. You must offer your life for what you believe. And that's what this song says. And sometimes you will survive the battle and enjoy the fruits. Oh, freedom. And you sing it for yourself. Yeah. Oh, freedom. Oh, freedom over me. And before I be a slave, I'll be buried in my grave and go home to my Lord and be free. No more mourning. No more mourning. No more mourning over me. Oh, yeah. And before I be a slave, I'll be buried in my grave.
We know that what we do at Highlander is done in many ways by many people, some of whom have been at Highlander, some of whom haven't, and they're doing the same thing in their own way. So we're just part of a process of democratizing society in the hopes of eventually having a just society for everybody. We had a faith. I don't think it was a blind faith. I think it's a sound faith, and the idea that there can be a true democracy somehow worked out by people, where people will control their lives and will not be exploited for the benefit of someone else. And it's becoming increasingly clear that we can't have democracy if we don't realize that there's a kind of a natural twin to political democracy. That's economic democracy. And political democracy is shackled if the economic democracy doesn't develop along with the political democracy. I think the future is well, as somebody said one time when I said it, it said it's out there. It's not only out there, but it's ready to be changed. It's malleable, and there's nothing fixed that you can't unfix. But to unfix things that appear to be fixed, you have to be not only creative and imaginative, but courageously dedicated for the long haul.
We preach this all the time to people. Don't look for anybody else to be a leader. You start doing it yourself. You're as good as anybody else in doing it because you know what the problem is. You know the way you like things to be. So why not work on making it that way? Well, the tables was turned on me. You know, I was in this teaching process. I was teaching people this, and everywhere we went, we did it. You know, and then in 1972, my minister said to me, "Bernice, why don't you run for the House of Representatives?" I said, "Oh no, not me. I'll support anybody else." And he said, "Well, no, it's time a woman run." You know, I came home and I thought about it. I said, the tables have been turned on me. I've been telling everybody, why look elsewhere for a leader? Why not step out yourself and do it? You know? So I said, now how can I say no that I'm not going to do it? I've got to accept the challenge to go ahead and do it. So I did.
Sometimes I feel like Martin Luther King, you know, I've got a dream too. I know he had a dream, I've got a dream. It's just the injustice, I think, you know, like black people ain't had justice, poor people ain't had justice. It's just the injustice in the world. Let them know we here and that we care and they should care about us.
I go from the way I felt in Albany, Georgia when I walked in the street. And if I feel that way in a position I hold, then I know I'm doing my work. And where that has taken me is taking stands against the Vietnam War, taking stands for homosexual rights, taking stands with Native Americans, taking stands on women's issues, taking stands against militarism, against the draft, taking stand against toxic waste for the environment. Now, all of those things, a lot of times when people talk about those things, they're like separate movements. For me, that's the stance I took when I walked on the street in Albany, Georgia.
Anytime that they feel that you're too much politically out of where they feel like you should be, then that's when one is destroyed. I think that Martin Luther King was one of the better examples, that Martin was very good as long as he was talking about segregation in the South. But when he started talking about the problem in Vietnam, he really got against Hoover and everybody else. And there's some of us that are going to end up being destroyed with the thing as it relates to Nicaragua and El Salvador, because people just don't want you to discuss those kinds of things, that you should not care anything about those people. And I don't see how you can be a caring person and not care about what's going on in Nicaragua, not care what's going on in El Salvador.
We met one guy from Guatemala.
Yeah.
And he's got a problem. His whole generation has got the problem. And it is a chemical that America banned, and they took there, you know.
But that's the importance of getting the word out, because we didn't know that. As much as we have been into this and as much as we've taught ourselves, we didn't know that the United States was banning chemicals that are bad for us and sending them to other countries and then sending them back to us through food. I didn't know that it was dangerous for my little girl to eat a banana that she just picked up out of the grocery store. Now they're talking about we can survive through a nuclear war, which is ridiculous because they can't take care of small disasters that's happening to us now. And frankly, I don't want to die. I don't want my children to die. I want to leave them with clean mountains and fresh air and these rivers. I want them to know all these things that we've grown up knowing. And if people don't realize that these are the things that are happening to us now, we're losing it. We're losing it so fast. And we've got to save it. And we can't leave it up to somebody else to save it. We've got to. We've got to say, no more. We don't want nuclear war. We don't want no more bombs built. We don't want no more waste dumped in mountains and hollers. We don't want no more streams polluted. I don't want to see fish die. And it's got to be stopped. It has got to be stopped now. It's got to be stopped in our lifetime. We've got to stop it so our children will have a lifetime.
I wanna lay down my desire.